have folks in our community like Michael Santo and Alicia Severn to help us out with these complex issues that our state is throwing at us. So I'm going to start by introducing Michael Santo here. He's the co-founder of Bechtel and Santo, and now Bechtel, Santo, and Severn. Over the years, Michael has been a most willing and active contributor to our community of HR and payroll professionals. He has been a key speaker at our regional payroll conferences for as long as I can remember, which is a ways back. And he's always one of the most popular speakers because he's just kind of he's fun to listen to, which is kind of hard. Fun is hard to do with employment law, so that's always a challenge. So anyway, he helps to keep us informed, and we are super grateful for that. Michael began practicing law way back in 1992 with a law degree from University of Detroit, and his undergrad, I believe, from Michigan State.
So let's not confuse that with the other university at Champaign.
Yeah, I almost stepped on that. So Michael and his firm assist employers in staying compliant with day-to-day employment issues, handbook and policy development, and counseling business owners on how to effectively run their business as related to employment law. Michael also represents employers in court all the way up to the Colorado Supreme Court. Michael has also been honored by being invited to be a fellow of the Colorado Bar Association. And today we are not only blessed with having Michael Santo here to help us navigate all these new leave regulations, but also his colleague and partner here at the law firm, Alicia Severn. Thank you so much for taking the time to better inform us. I want to lay a couple ground rules out here in front. Many of you are going to have questions, and there's a chat feature in Zoom. We ask you to submit your questions as they come up through the Zoom chat, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. Also, I want to make it clear out from the outset in our discussions with both Michael and Alicia this is a brand new regulation, and the dust has not settled yet on how it is going to be enforced. So that was going to be one of the fun parts about having both Michael and Alicia here, is in some cases they have a difference of opinion, which is very realistic in the real workplace right now on how these are going to be applied. So Michael, would you please do us the honor of introducing Alicia?
Well, of course. I mean, I'd be happy to. Thanks, John, for those words. Alicia and I have worked together for practically a decade now, as really the only person that Betty and I have ever thought about putting on with the firm. And it has been I've really enjoyed my time practicing with Alicia. I will get a little verklempt as I talk about it, because unfortunately, this is our last talk together. Alicia is moving on to, I would say, Alicia, jump in, as of yet undecided opportunities. And
yes, that's accurate. Yep.
As I joke, she can only put up with working with me for 10 years, and that was officially no.
That's not it.
So, but we thought we would do one last talk because I know those of you who have seen us will say, yeah, they don't always agree. And it's one of the things I've most enjoyed in working with Alicia. And unfortunately, for all of you, the Colorado Healthy Families and Workplaces Act definitely gives us the opportunity. In fact, as I was telling John and Manon as we were getting ready for the talk to start, I've got my materials ready for when our differences and arguments come up, because this act is very confusing. And they didn't give us a lot of time. So thank you for everyone who's attending this morning. I'm excited thinking of all of you sitting out there and what you have in front of you. It is an interesting time for all of us. So let's get started. We've all seen this slide 1,000 times of COVID-19.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
Michael, I want to interrupt you because I was remiss. I did not introduce my partner, Manon Jacob here, who all of our clients know probably much better than me, because Manon works on the front lines and deals with people on a day-to-day basis, and she keeps me in order, and I am blessed to have her on my team.
I thought she just did all the work. I didn't know.
She does, yeah, she keeps us organized, and she helps even you and I get things like this organized. They wouldn't happen without you, man, so thank you.
Yeah, Manning is invaluable in setting up these talks. And this talk really was born on Monday. I called Angela and John after talking to a few folks and said, I think we want to get on the same page as to how we're advising all of our clients. And they said, well, it seems like an opportune time to do a talk. And I said, what a great idea. The problem is, it goes into effect January 1st. Do you think we can do something the week of the first, how close? And they're like, how about Friday? And I was like, Friday? That's 4 days away. And don't worry, we'll get it all figured out. And they did, and it's been invaluable. So what has happened? I'm not going to go over the COVID history. You all know it as well as I do. In July, in June, a very shortened legislative session produced this Healthy Families and Workplaces Act from the legislature. The governor signed I just blanked, July 15th, July 16th, somewhere in there. The majority of it goes into effect on January 1. That's the majority that we're going to be speaking of. We're currently under some of the other provisions, which we'll briefly reference, but for the most part, we're going to focus on those things that go into effect on January 1. As I say here, in June, July, the Colorado legislature passed the Healthy Families and Workplaces Act. I've been told that the way they're referring to it over at the Department of Labor is HFWA. HFWA. I'm praying that someone comes up with another way, but for now, we're going to call it HFWA. It mirrors, in a lot of perspectives, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. But in a lot of ways, it's also really different. So the biggest difference, I wouldn't say the only difference, that's what I put in here, but I wouldn't say the only, I would say the biggest difference is by far that the FFCRA had a few exclusions, if you were under 50, if you were healthcare, if you were over 500. Healthy Families includes everyone. It will eventually include everyone. Right now, we'll see in a second, it's only including on January 1, those with 16 or more. Those with under that, it will include on January 1, 2022. But the biggest difference by far is that this is everybody. So starting on January 1, employers with 16 or more employees must provide paid sick leave. Someone asked me the other day, why did they do this? Where's this from? And really, it's from what happened in March and April of this year, where employees were organizations were reducing workforces. We saw individuals in the droves applying for unemployment benefits. And frankly, I think the state realized, well, a lot of organizations maybe don't have sick leave, or perhaps we need a transition period should things like this occur. And then, they came up with Healthy Families, which provides for the short-term leave. In the talk, and I know you all are aware of this, in the talk, I'm not going to spend much, if at all, on Proposition 118. For those of you who know or will recall, November 3rd, we in Colorado passed Proposition 118, which is the paid family leave, which will provide for 12 weeks or 16 weeks of leave. But that's not till 2023 that we're taking premiums, 2024 that we're providing leaves. So frankly, let's focus now on Healthy Families, because that's what we have to deal with for the next couple of years. So starting January 1, organizations with 16 or more employees must provide employees with paid sick leave benefits to be used for these following reasons: an employee's mental or physical need, diagnosis, treatment, preventative care. If they're caring for a sick family member, could be someone related by blood, by marriage, by civil union, someone that they stand in local parentis with. So for example, they act as the parent, even though they may not be the parent. The big expansion in this from a lot of laws is that bottom provision, or a person whom the employee is responsible for providing or arranging healthcare or safety-related care. If one of your employees has someone they're caring for, this is going to kick in healthy families as well. So keep track. It's a very broad group that individuals are allowed to take leave for. So something that's a little different.
If I can jump in there.
Sure.
One thing that I've seen a little bit is kind of a desire to incorporate healthy families into FMLA. And that's, a great idea on a lot of fronts, and we'll see where there's some little differences, but that is one of the differences to keep in mind if you're thinking about how can we make this smooth and do a smooth transition with what we already have. This is one area to really be cognizant of, is that the definition of who's covered is much more expansive under this Colorado law than under the federal FMLA.
Yes, no, that's a great point. It is a very big expansion. Even though, as you said, parts have been borrowed, this is a big expansion of that issue. And instances where a public health official has ordered the closure of an employee's place of business or the employee's child's school, place of care, those kind of things, which is something that is borrowed from the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. Okay, you would think a nice, easy issue like how to count to 16 would be piece of cake, no concerns. How hard could it be to figure out how many employees we have? Well, it's a little different than that. The way that, and this gives us a chance really early on to talk about all the things that have come out on this, which is, this is Healthy Families, it's the act. It's the thing that the legislature passed and the governor signed. Then recently, the Colorado Department of Labor came out with the wage protection rules. And you would think, well, that's wage protection. Isn't that on that equal pay thing that's coming out, or that's starting on January 1? Isn't that on the vacation leave or those kind of things? Yes, but it also covers healthy families. And so that's in there. And then just a couple, about 10 days ago or so, I lose track of time at this point, the Department of Labor came out with the interpretive notice and formal opinion information 6B. If you're 6B as in boy, you can get all those publications, particularly 6B, which is the interpretive guideline, are available on the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment's website. Keep track that you're looking at the right 6B. 6B has gone through a couple of different tweaks and changes. And so you'll definitely want to keep track that in the lower corner right here, it says last updated December 2020, because there were some changes before then. These were more expansive. So one of the interesting things that I think Alicia and I will go over, and I know we'll go over today, but one of the things we may be debating is the difference between the act, the difference between the the wage protection rules and the 6B notice. Those are from the Colorado Department of Labor. They are not from the legislature. They are not from the governor. They are not from a court opinion. So those notices are, which I would rank, hearkening back to constitutional law, which is now about 100 years ago for me, I would rank as below regulations in terms of their enforceability, but they're definitely what the Department of Labor, kind of their thinking. But if you got to keep track, and this just happened recently. An example is the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. When that came out, the United States Department of Labor issued a regulation on April 3rd saying, hey, here's what we think. Here's the teeth of this law. Here's all this information. It was in April of 2020. Here's what, for example, healthcare provider means. We exempted healthcare providers. What does that mean in practice? The law said we exempt healthcare providers, but what does it really mean day to day? The Department of Labor issued that. They end up getting sued on that on the issue of healthcare provider and a number of other provisions under the law. And in essence, the lawsuit said, whoa, 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 Department of Labor, you went too far. You're allowed to explain the law. You're allowed to provide your interpretations of it, but you can't expand the law. You can't take it to another place. You can't limit rights that were provided in the law, or you can't expand rights that were provided in the law. And so they were sued, the Department of Labor was, and in early to mid-September 2020, a New York court came out and said, yeah, Department of Labor, specifically with respect to healthcare provider, you made that definition way too broad. For example, there's an argument that under the Family First Coronavirus Response Act regulations, the healthcare provider meant anybody who was providing services for a healthcare provider, like a law firm, or like Subway, or Jimmy John's, or Main Street Bagel, who took meals to the hospitals. Were they providing services? And the New York court said, way too broad. So Department of Labor, you messed up on that. Now, what the impact of that has not been debated much, of course, because Family First Coronavirus Response Act ends on December 31st, so there hasn't been much on that. But when we're looking here today, and one of the things we're going to bring up is you got this act, and you got these things from the Department of Labor. They're the same thing as what the U.S. Department of Labor did. And there is that ability in January, in February, or in months later, resulting lawsuits to say, no, 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 don't go with what the Department of Labor says. In fact, Alicia, the example I should have used, many of you know about the vacation pay case we are involved in at the Supreme Court. A year before before the Court of Appeals decision, certainly before the Supreme Court decision, the Colorado Department of Labor said, no, we think vacation should work differently than what Bechtel, Santo, and Severn are arguing. And the Court of Appeals said, yeah, we got it, but we're still going forward. And this is our decision. They did not take the advice of the DOL. So keep in mind that when we go over these things, the act is definitely controls, and the question will become, is the Department of Labor interpretive notice merely informational, or is it, how binding is it? The first issue with respect to that comes up to how to count to 16. And this actually came up in a talk recently where an organization said to me, hey, we have 10 in the winter, but we go up to like 25 in the summer. Am I going to be required to comply with this act? Well, looking at the law, effective January 1, each employer with 16 or more employees shall provide each employee paid sick leave as provided in this section. Certainly seems to say that, hey, once you got 16, you're covered. Once you got 16, you need to provide paid sick leave. But then the notice came out, the CDLE rules. And what they did, and this harkens back to a point Alicia made a couple of minutes ago, which is they borrowed the FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act test, for how to determine how many employees you have. And what they're saying here is basically, we're going to use this threshold of, do you have 16 or more employees for 20 or more work weeks? Until you have that, you're not covered. So for example, come December 31st of this year, January 1st, you have 15 or less employees. You then bring in a bunch on January 2nd. The Department of Labor would say, you're not covered till you're at 16 or more for 20 or more work weeks. So sometime in May. The law seems to say, no, 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 if you have 16 or more employees, you're covered. So for those who are bouncing back and forth, the determination needs to be made. Are we going to rely on the CDLE rules, or are we going to rely on the law? I'm usually, at that point, more conservative because it's taking away rights from employees. The CDLE rules is because it's delaying. Now, mind you, this is only a one-year issue. This will not be an issue in the future because a year from now, every organization is covered. That 16 threshold is gone. but something in the first year, 2021, you'll want to keep track of. Okay, questions? What must employers provide? Our next thing. Beginning on the date of hire or the applicable date of the act, which is either January 1st or whatever date the employees are hired or is hired. An employee will accrue 1 hour of paid sick leave for every 30 hours worked. That's an important definition, worked, and we'll get to that in a second. Up to 48 hours or 6 work days. You can set beyond 48, you can do 480, you can do 4,000, whatever you want to do. But it can't be your threshold under healthy families cannot be lower than 48 hours.
Less than.
Yes, thank you. That's, see, I need to keep, she's less than 48 hours.
Right.
Covered employees, who's covered? If they're employed by you, they're covered. Full-time, part-time, regular, casual, PTO, PRN, whatever you want to call the employee, locum, except they're employees. If they're an employee, they're accruing the leave. They have to accrue leave under this law. So when you're writing your policies, and for those of you who have policies currently, keep track. A lot of us will limit our paid leaves to just regular employees or full-time employees or part-time at a prorated share. It's already set up as a prorated share here because it's 1 hour accrued for every 30 hours work. So every employee you've got is accruing leave. I don't read it to say that they accrue partial leave. So in this, let's say I worked 45 hours and I say to you, I need 2 hours of leave to go to a doctor's appointment. I look at him as being 1 hour of paid leave for every 30 hours. So if you follow the law, you would not get 1.5, you would only get the 1. I don't see a partial. Alicia, you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Yeah.
That's about as much backing as Alicia gives me. That's probably right. I could see where your argument comes. No,
I could see that.
Yeah. And the next thing is that employees can roll over paid sick leave, unused paid sick time. You can limit that. So for example, if you set your hours at 96, at the end of the calendar year, the anniversary year, the fiscal year, whatever year you may use, you can then bring that back to 48. The other thing that I mentioned here, and we're going to mention it a lot of times actually in this talk because of how it works, but you may front load the hours. So come January 1st, you may say, look, I'm not going to keep track of how many hours so-and-so works, or I'm not going to keep track. I'm just giving everybody 48 hours. The law permits you to do that. So you can just drop 48 hours into their bank. Depending on how you read then one of the next provisions, that may actually be a good thing, or a recommended thing. But don't forget, it doesn't have to be an accrual. You can just simply drop in. Then if the employee uses it, well, they've got that through the year, but next January 1st, you're dropping in another 48 or whenever date you pick. How are hours actually accrued? And this, I would argue, is different than the law, but this is what the interpretive notice says, which is non-exempt employees accrue leave for 1 hour of paid leave for every 30 hours worked, up to 48. Starting on the first day. So if you have you wait 90 days, not anymore. Now we're doing it on the first day. If it's weed, you can't use it for 30 days. Nope, they can use it once it's accrued. So non-exempt employees accrue for all hours worked. That includes those before 40, that includes those after 40. I have said in talks that the law doesn't provide for overtime hours as counting for non-exempt employees. The Department of Labor disagrees with me by their interpretive notice because they say it's all hours, if all hours worked. So they don't accrue it for vacation or holiday or blah, blah, blah. If they're working, they're accruing it. If they work 60 hours in a work week, that means they've already accrued 2 hours. So keep that in mind for your non-exempt employees. You have to include all hours worked. What about your
Michael, we
exempt?
have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so from Melissa, she asks, can you pay out sick leave at the end of the year to prevent rollover?
You pay out sick leave at the end of the year. I mean, it's either the notice or the wage protection rules that discuss about, oh, no, it's the, no, the payout is discussed in the, when the employee comes back part of things. It does talk about paying out. You can do that, but the law doesn't require it. So there is no, as we'll see in a future slide, there is no requirement for you to pay it upon termination or before rollover. This is not work like, I'm not even gonna go down that road. This is not work. It is clear that this does not have to be paid. You can pay it at the end of the year, but you're not required to.
So could you prevent having to roll it into the new year by paying it out in December, or do you have to roll it over?
You could pay it out at the end of the year, but you're paying out, you're paying out leave. I guess you're taking them back to zero, and then they're going to accrue up to 48, either as a bucket dump or in the accrual. So eventually they're going to get to 48 anyways, and you're paying out leave on December 31st that you don't have to. So maybe I have to do that. You currently could though.
So just to clarify, does the sick leave accrue year after year if the person does not use it?
As long as they haven't reached the cap, it keeps accruing. You just keep, every 30 hours you work, you get another leave, or I'm sorry, another hour. You work another 30, you get another hour. Another 30, you get another hour. Over and over and over, you keep accruing it. Once you hit the cap, whatever cap you establish, and it can't be less than 48. Once you hit that cap, 96, 148, then you stop accruing until you use some, then you would accrue again.
Okay, so you can cap it at 48 hours always. And then we have
Yes.
another question from Brittany. Is this on top of current PTO policy, or is it required only if you don't have a current policy that meets these minimum requirements?
Brittany, if COVID was over or not a thing, well, probably we wouldn't be discussing this law, but if we were you got to stop by the office and you will officially get a prize, because that is the key question where we will get to, I think, in a slide or two. So hold on to that question, but that for 2 seconds, that is the key question to this whole thing, or the big question. There are many keys. So hold on to that question.
Michael, I've got a question here. So for exempt employees, for your true salaried employees,
To exempt.
does the law say that all workers are going to accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours worked? And does it have a separate category for that accrual for exempt employees that might be working 55 hours or 60 hours a week regularly as an salaried employee? Wouldn't you have to track time for those people in order to, because I don't see in the law where it talks about salary, exempt and non-exempt.
I'm going to talk to Alicia. Okay, so because Alicia and I have a disagreement. I am right. You're all yet wrong. I am dead. So as we'll look on the slide, it does have a difference for exempt employees, not just salary, but exempt employees. That overtime exempt employees accrue as if they work 40 hours a work, as if they work 40 hours weekly. And it says this, even if they work more.
Okay.
But now this is where Alicia will jump in and say, whoa. The law actually says, unless their scheduled hours are something different. Alicia, you probably can report it off the top of your head. But I would say that what I read that law, I get to go first. I'm talking.
No.
So what I think the law is saying is that exempt employees accrue as if they work 40. But on the other hand, let's say you have a 4-day work week and that exempt employee only works 32 hours. then they can accrue as if they're working 32, even if they work 40 or 50. But exempt employees, you go off, in essence, the number of hours scheduled, the number of that, and it only caps at 40. It does not require you to keep track beyond that. I think the law is pretty clear, but the interpretive notice is flat out clear. Now, I think there's another opinion which will be expressed by Alicia in about 7 seconds.
Yes.
So let me ask a question before you express, Alicia, here.
Sure.
Is, okay, so a lot of salaried employees don't have a schedule. They just work till the job's done.
Right.
So but maybe they normally work 50 or 60 hours, but they're not necessarily scheduled. How do they, any idea how they're going to interpret that?
Yeah, I think they're going to interpret that under the statement in here, which is that you treat exempt employees as if they work 40, even if they're scheduled for 50, even if they're scheduled for whatever. If their schedule is under 40, there's an argument you could cap them under that. But I think if you have a normal full-time open 9-to-5 business type of thing, exempt employees occasionally work on weekends. I just base it on 40 hours, which seems somewhat inconsistent that you have exempt employees and non-exempt employees in essence accruing differently, but that's right. What the law, I would say, covers.
But here's where the challenge comes in, is I agree with Michael, that's what the regulations say, and that's what the interpretive notice says from the Department of Labor. I think the statute that is getting us to the point where we have to implement this paid sick leave in the first place is saying something else, because what it says is that exempt employees accrue up to 40 hours based on the assumption that that's what they're working. So I think the argument is we assume that all overtime exempt employees are working 40 hours, but when we have actual knowledge that they're working more, and that could be employees just tracking their own time and then letting you know, hey, I'm working 55 hours, 60 hours, whatever it is. When we have actual knowledge, then we have to do the 1 for 30. And so there I think is a split, and we'll see some kind of legal guidance at some point explaining how we're really supposed to do this. And I think the thing that really gets us there is that if we know overtime exempt employees are working fewer than 40 hours, we can pay them based on the fewer hours that they're working. And I think we'll eventually see that for over a 40 hour of work too for overtime exempt employees. So this is another.
I certainly think if you pay them under the 40 based on assumption, you then have to look at it if they work over 40. Then you'd have to look at it that way. But I think if you set it at, hey, and particularly make it clear in your policies that, hey, we're going to have exempt employees accrue as if they work 40 hours, that's where I would go with on that.
Yeah. And I think that it leaves room for challenge, and we'll see what happens. But certainly there's support in the regulations to do that. Yeah.
You know, Michael, interesting in our industry, because part of our product selection is timekeeping, is in the past 5 years, we've had more and more companies with exempt employees asking, well, I would like to have our exempt employees clock in and out so that I know that they're here, and so that I know that they're working the expected number of hours. So they've got exempted employees who they expect to work 50 hours, and they're wanting them to clock in and out, which is a little bit at odds with work till the job's done.
Yeah.
As a salary employee. So
the more you have that, John,
what they do.
Yeah, the more you have that, I think the more it starts to look like you have to do it on the accrual. 1 for 30.
Right.
Okay, going back to Brittany's question, this is by far the #1 thing we hear when we're talking to people, which is I'll ask them, hey, how's your healthy families policy coming along? Or how are you getting the interpretation? And everyone says this pretty much to a core, says the same thing to me. We're not worried about it because we give more than that now. We give, and I'll usually ask a couple follow-up questions like, well, what do you do with employees, new employees? Well, we're going to move that. It's not going to be 90 days. But and they're going to be able to use it right from the very beginning. But we give this already, so it's not going to be an issue for us. There is in the notice, and I call it a rose by any other name, but in the interpretive guide notice, it does say that, hey, if you have a policy that provides for paid time off, often called the PTO, for both HIPAA, for both non-HFWA and HFWA purposes, you do not need to do an additional HFWA policy. But keep in mind this issue. It is not just accrual. And that seems to be what is being heard. We hear from many employers, what the press is reporting is that many of them are hearing, as long as or many of them are writing, as long as you accrue 1 for 30 from the start, you're good. Or people will say, well, it says up to 40 and we give 80, that's fine, we're going to be good. Not necessarily true, because even the interpretive guidelines provide for so much more. First, to require in your PTO policy, you at least have to have an amount of hours with pay sufficient to satisfy HFWA. For all the same purposes covered by HFWA and applicable rules, one of the concerning applicable rules in HFWA is the identification of the reasons for leave. You have to identify, at least I read HFWA, to say you have to identify in your policy, you have to provide notice to your policy as to the basis for leave that they can request. Many of our PTO policies that we've seen don't have any of the HFWA reasons in there. For example, domestic violence. Most of us don't have anything in our PTO policy about an employee's ability to take off for domestic violence. But your policy needs to have all that in there. If you want your PTO to be, in essence, mushed with HFWA, your PTO must meet all the requirements of HFWA, not just, I can't believe I'm picking up HFWA. Oh my God. Not just the accrual, but also you have to identify the reasons for leave. Also have to identify all the carryover. Also have to identify all the documentation requirements. Also need to identify all the anti-retaliation and anti-interference rights. That needs to be in your policy as well. Most of us, in fact, I have been 28 years of practicing, I have never seen a PTO or vacation policy that has an anti-retaliation or an anti-interference statement language. But that needs to be in there if you're going to say, we're going to combine HFWA. Also for organizations who say, well, we got a vacation and it doesn't get to 1 to 30, but when you combine our sick leave, that in combination gets to 1 for 30, that can work. But both then your vacation and sick leave need to have the HFWA stuff in there so you can mush them together. You have to make sure you're meeting all the requirements of HFWA in whatever policy you use. So can you, for those who say, well, I got a PTO policy, that meets this part, I'm not worried. Yes, but make sure you meet all the other requirements. And one of the big ones, of course, is, well, what do you do upon termination? Most of us pay out PTO upon termination. And Alicia just argued the vacation pay case at the Supreme Court about a month ago. I don't know, about 3 weeks ago. So that decision is going to be coming out soon. And maybe the legislature is going to change that in the 2021 legislative term. But most of us have a PTO policy that pays out accrued. Well, now, if you've combined HFWA into there, do you now need to pay out HFWA? Because your PTO policy says we pay upon termination. Additionally, if you say, no, we're not too worried about that because we're going to cap HFWA at 48. Okay, does that mean you're going to cap PTO at 48? Because most organizations or most employees want to take vacation beyond 6 days. So then you get into the issue of, well, we've got a cap of 48 for HFWA, but employers want to get longer vacation. So the short answer, the encompassing answer is yes. There's no question you can have a policy, a PTO policy, a Michael policy, whatever you want to call it, that meets the requirements of HFWA, vacation, sick leave, holiday, whatever you want to throw into that sausage. But when you do that, just make sure your policy is meeting all the requirements of HFWA. Not
think
just
that the-
approval. Alicia?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, one of the big things that I'm seeing and trying to put all of this together is focusing on the documentation requirements, because under a lot of sick leave policies, we have documentation about how, employees need to substantiate their need for leave. What HFWA is doing is saying documentation is very limited. We can't require a signature. We can't require that it comes from a healthcare provider. It can't be notarized. If employees incur more expenses to get some kind of documentation, they don't have to provide it. They don't have to incur that expense. And so it's very, very limited under HFWA, where maybe as an organization, you want to have a little more control in other situations that aren't covered by HFWA. And so that's something to think about too. We'd really need to pull that back in a standard sick leave policy, whereas maybe a separate policy works better, but it's dependent on each organization.
John, you got a question?
So, yeah, I was just going to say, part of the other challenge is having systems to track and monitor the accruals and usage of this. So what we've been saying to because systems are limited, they have limited capabilities of managing crazy melded policies. So what we've been recommending to our clients is, we think that you should have a policy that is named the Healthy Families, that is the HFWA name on it, and it has the regulations associated with that policy. It's completely separated from your PTO policy. You don't have to pay it out upon termination or separation, and you can wait for 60 or 90 days to start accruing PTO. But I, as an employer, want to be able to point at the policy, because I think this is going to get messy, and say, we match the state policy. There it is. There's the written documentation, there's the regulations, and we are accruing and using in an identical manner to the policy required by the state.
Yeah, what's really tricky, John, in the tracking is also, and this is something that Alicia and I don't disagree or are in agreement on, but it just doesn't make any sense, which is the law, the interpretive notice bounce back and forth between saying you can cap leave accrual at 48 and says you can cap usage at 48. Right. So for example, if you set out a policy because your employees are like, whoa, we want our PTO to be longer. Okay, fine, we'll make it 200 hours. And you're going to keep accruing HFWA while you're accruing PTO under this one umbrella. You can still cap usage of HFWA at 48, even though the accrual is there to use more than that. So when you're talking about tracking, you're not just talking about tracking accrual, we're also talking about tracking usage, because the law does permit you to cap usage at more than 48. Now, frankly, how they're talking about this weird thing of you can accrue more than 48, but you can't use more than 48, I got nothing on how they thought that was clear to anybody.
We have a number of clients, Michael, that allow people to accrue and roll over significantly more than 48 hours of sick time for a situation like a heart attack or something, where somebody's really sick and they need to be out for an extended period of time. If it's me as an employer and I want to have a available sick time over this regulation, I am still going to have a HFWA policy and accrual bucket they can pull out of. And if I want to allow more, I might have a separate sick leave policy that accrues under separate rules, but I wouldn't blend them. And that way I can carry over more, but I've got this policy that anybody can look at, or an auditor can look at and go, yep, you've hit the regulation on the money.
I think for right now, for 2021, which generally concerns mostly larger organizations, you may see that ability, but smaller organizations, I mean, we've got 7 of us, to suddenly give 48 hours, I don't know where it's up, but that will be something that employers need to look at. So I want to make sure we get through the rest, because there's another big thing.
Yeah.
You can set the usage at hourly increments unless you want to set it at something else. In addition, you cannot get Alicia was talking about the documentation. You can't get documentation until the employee has been gone for 4 or more consecutive days, 4 or more consecutive. So partial days, if it's a HFWA covered reason, we can no longer ask. Now, I think that's a little inconsistent with the FMLA, because those of you who, if you have an overnight stay in a hospital, you can get FMLA certifications right away. So, but you'll want to make clear with your employee under what law you're requesting it. Any other requirements? Yes, you're not required to pay out unused vacation. Well, unless it's under the handbook, something to keep in mind there.
Unused sick.
Unused sick, yes, sorry. You can roll over up to 48 hours in any given year. We've talked about that, and we can elect it from there. If you have an employee who leaves and then comes back with 6 months, like when Alicia leaves and she realizes the next day that, Bechtel, Santo, and Severn was the greatest place to work and she wants to come back. Unfortunately, well, she won't get any HFWA, but that's a bad example. So if you have an employee leave and then come back, if they come back within 6 months and you didn't pay it out, their accrual reinstates. It goes back to where it was. So keep in mind in that. So there's 2 buckets of leave under this, and we need to get to this part, which is there is healthy family sick leave, which is the 1 hour of sick leave for every 30 hours work. And then there is the public emergency. Public emergency part of HFWA says that when a public emergency is declared, or I'm sorry, when we're in a public emergency, the organization needs to, in essence, drop 80 hours into an employee's bank of leave. Now, you are a couple of questions on that. Let me see. Well, let me get the first one, because we talked about the act contains relating to public health emergencies. We have to supplement, take an additional 2 weeks. At the beginning of COVID, back in March, the federal government declared a public health emergency. On Friday, October 2nd, the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Azar, which until this thing, I wouldn't have been able to do that. But now I know I'm like crazy. They indicated that the public health emergency will be extended beyond October 21st or 23rd, and will actually be expected to go until about January 21st, 2021. As I put in here, I have no idea why January 21st was picked. I mean, maybe it has something to do with what happens the day before. So for purposes of HFWA, we are in a public health emergency right now. We will be in one as of January 1st, but for purposes of HFWA, in terms of the putting the 80 hours in, you do not need to put the 80 hours in unless the health emergency is declared on or after January 1st, according to the Department of Labor. I think that's wrong under the law, but I can tell you what the notice is very clear about is that they say it's on the day a public health emergency is declared. I think, we've jokingly set the office pool at January 20th for when the next public health emergency will be declared, perhaps by the new administration, or the governor, certainly knowing that this issue is out there, may declare a public health emergency on or shortly after January 1st, 2021. So right now, while we were under a public health emergency, we are not under it for purposes of giving the 80.
Interesting.
The other key thing with the 80, and this is the big debate, I don't know if Alicia and I will have it, but in terms of what exactly it means, is that you are allowed to use the leave the employees got already as an offset to the 80. So for example, let's pretend that a public health emergency is not declared by anyone until February 1st, 2021. Alicia, in that first month of January, works like crazy and builds up 20 hours of leave. Don't ask how, she just does. Purposes of example. I don't work as much because it's too nice and we're skiing, or I'm skiing. I don't work as much and I'm skiing. and I only get 10 hours of leave in January. Public health emergency is declared. Now we need to drop 80 hours into both of our banks. Alicia's at 20, so she gets 60. I'm at 10, so I get 70.
Oh, interesting.
The law is clear that even after that happens, we still, both of us, still keep accruing leave. As I jokingly say at almost every seminar, moms call at the worst time. At January, so February 1st, Alicia gets 60, I get 70. But both of us in February keep accruing leave because neither one of us are at the sick leave cap of 48. So we keep accruing 1 hour of sick leave for every 30 hours worked. So Alicia, after 30 more hours, gets to 21, and then she gets to 22. She keeps going up. The question that is out there that is not clear under the regulations at all is, does that accrual by Alicia and by me pull leave from public health emergency into sick leave? So for example, if Alicia keeps accruing leave up to 48, she gets to 48 and it's still a public health emergency, she would have 48 plus 60. And when I get to 48, let's say I get to 48, I get my 48 plus 70. Or does that accrual pull from public health emergency into our sick leave so that by the time we both hit 48, we don't have 60 and 70 respectively, we only have 32. 48 plus 32 equals 80. I look at the I think we're a little different on this. I think Alicia leans toward it pulls from public health emergency. I tend to look at it more as separate buckets, but it is not. This is future litigation out there. It is not clear where that leave comes from. Alicia, you want to counterpoint?
No, I think that's right. And I think there's another issue, if you want to talk about that lies on top of this, which is, if we can touch on it just quickly, that is definitely an issue. Are we in separate buckets, or does the accrual bring down the public health emergency? We don't know about that. But on top of that issue, the other issue that we're seeing is that in the regulations, CDLE has said that employees can use the full 80 hours of public health emergency leave before tapping into the paid sick leave bank. Now that seems to indicate that this taking from paid sick leave to do what we need to do under public health, under public emergency leave isn't happening, which of course is in the statute. What CDLE is saying is that they're two separate buckets that essentially cannot be combined. And so in public health emergency, we have to drain the public health emergency bucket before we get to paid sick leave. The statute says something different. So there's a lot of issues going on with public health emergency leave that are ripe for future litigation.
There's just no, sure.
So with this 80 hours potentially that you get on February 1st, does that, you fill up the bucket with 80 hours. When does that expire? Is it removed at the end of the year? Is it removed at the end of the health emergency? Or do they just get to keep those 80 hours in their bank forever?
Great question. The 80 hours or whatever is in there based upon how much they've already got accrued, that leave stays until 4 weeks past the expiration of the public emergency. So if the public emergency goes from February 1st to August 1st, they would hold on to that leave through September 1st, 2021, because you get it 30 days beyond the declaration of the public emergency.
So question on what you've heard, because you're probably better informed at higher levels than most of us are here. So with the federal leave, there was a tax credit for employers because it's an enormous employer expense, obviously. Is there any talk in Colorado about a tax credit for this? I haven't heard any.
No, I've heard nothing on that at all. They're putting this on the back of employers. Is the other.
Ouch. Yeah, ouch. So,
The public health emergency has a lot less certifications requirements because frankly, you're supposed to know, I guess, that we're under a public emergency. So employees don't need that as much or need to provide as much. Employees retain their accrued rights. Oh, this is what we were saying earlier. They also continue earning accrued leave, the sick leave, up to the 48 per year or whatever you set. That's what I said earlier. Unlike the paid sick leave, the documentation under the public health emergency is limited. They also identify that if you want to loan employees sick leave, you can loan them sick leave. For that, I'm not really sure that's going to be an issue because I'm convinced. I just think January 20th or maybe even January 4th, the governor may announce, because the governor is aware that this is out there. They just want all of us to have 80 hours. Or the new administration may announce on January 20th, we're under a public health emergency. Certainly the last administration put us into a public health emergency, and not to be political, the last administration may have a different view than the future administration with respect to those things. But the current administration put us into a public health emergency very quickly. So I think the next one will as well.
All right, another quick question, I hope. So is it when this public health emergency is declared, does every single employee automatically get 80 hours, or do they only get the 80 hours once they need it?
I look at it as they get it.
I would agree. Yeah.
They have the issue of they supplement. It says as soon as the public health emergency is declared, employers must supplement. I don't view that as you get to have it hanging out back here. You got to bring it to the forefront.
Okay.
These are the documentation requirements, which is basically as soon as practical, employees must notify, but as the notice provides from the CDLE, that as soon as practical is pretty low. Carries forward, we've talked about that. No paid leave if the business is entirely closed. This is one thing I thought that came out in the regs that is not, or not even the regs, just the notice. It's just in the notice lease or the wage protection. I forget where it is, but that employees may request, and we have to provide, they can request once a month, or if they need the leave, they need to know how much leave they have available for use, and we need to keep them apprised of how much they've already used. So either maybe it goes on their paycheck or they have a spreadsheet that they can access, but some place we need to be identifying for employees those leaves. Notice requirement. We must supply each employee with a written notice. In addition to that, you have to display a poster. That poster is currently available online. In fact, what we're doing in our recommended handbooks is we are actually including it in the handbook. So employees have that poster.
and I'm gonna say, especially with so many employees working remotely, emailing that out to your employees is probably a real good idea.
Yep.
Yeah. And also including it in your onboarding material. So something new when new employees are coming on, including it there is a good idea.
Yep. And then this is your thing, your policies need to identify that they cannot retaliate against employees for requesting. And your policy needs to identify that they have the right to file a complaint. So keep that in mind with that.
Hey, Michael, have you put together a like kind of a standard addendum to a handbook that would list the things that need to be included in that? Do you have anything like that you put together?
We have a standalone healthy families policy, but it's really basic. We do not have a template mush policy because it's just a mess and it requires, but we do have one that just has the very, very basics, but it doesn't deal with, it's close, but not perfect. So if you email us, we'll make sure we send that over to folks and email us, but it's a long way. It's really bare bones basic because there's a lot. This is, unlike workers' comp or unlike FMLA, which fairly are consistent policies or maybe an at-will statement, what we're finding with healthy families is there is no model that works for each employer. It's just each employer wants to handle it differently.
I'm gonna say that most employers probably don't have anything right now. So
Yeah.
something outlining the new piece would be super helpful.
Yeah,
And
reach out.
If you had that as a PDF that you're willing to share,
Yeah,
we
reach
would
out.
share that out.
Yeah, we'll send it over.
We just share that out to the attendees, so.
Don't forget two things, and I'm going to go over this really quickly, which is Healthy Families also said that all Colorado employers, except for the federal government, and I mean all, healthcare industry, under 50, over 500, whatever, you have to comply with the FFCRA. So if you haven't been doing that, you've been making employees use PTO or sick leave or those kind of things, keep in mind that Healthy Families, when it came in July, said from mid-July to the end of the year, we had to comply with Healthy Families. We had to comply with the FFCRA, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. So if you've been making employees who were out for COVID reasons use PTO, that needs to be, tweak that around a little bit. Two final thoughts. One, we have been remiss because this year has been crazy and we just did not think we would do justice to our past employers advisories, because we just thought if we did an employers advisory, which is our free newsletter, that we would, the next day something would change. We are doing a year-end review. That newsletter will be out next week. So keep an eye out for that. If you're on our newsletter list, you'll get a copy and it's going to do the whole year-end review. It's our longest newsletter ever. It's crazy long. But that's coming out. The one thing I also wanted to mention is I've spoken a lot on comps since March, and even before March of 2020, which is the new Colorado overtime and minimum pay standards order. By far the biggest debate going on in seminars when I talk is my analysis of the administrative exemption, which the comps number 36 said that you can only be administrative employee if you report to the executive. And I read that very literally to say, unless you report to the executive, the CEO, the president, or whatever, that I was concerned about using that exemption going forward. There are other requirements under that exemption, but that one is specifically mentioned in comps 36. You have to report to the executive. I'm happy to note that the Department of Labor, I don't think they listen to my talks, but maybe just by osmosis, they changed comps number 37 so that it now says the administrative employee must report to an executive, not the executive, but an executive. Big expansion, in my opinion, of the administrative exemption. So for those who were like, we're not going to comply with that, it's crazy. Good news, it's now an executive, not the executive. I know we're over and I apologize for that, but there was a lot we wanted to make sure. Manny, do you have any questions we need to address, or?
You did cover so many of them just in your conversation.
Okay,
thank
great.
you so much, for taking the time to do this. John, I think, has a couple of closing items. So.
A couple closing items. First of all, thank you so much to both of you for taking the time. You guys are a tremendous resource to our community and everybody that we talk to. We will send this recording out, link the recording out to all the people who attended. It will also be available on autopaychecks.com under blogs. We have that posted. We also, if those of you missed it, we did a presentation with Michael on, I believe it was January 31st of 2020. If you go into our blogs and search, there's a little tile where you can sort, go under blogs. The previous talks that Michael did on comps are there if you want to reference that. And let's see here, we're going to send these slides out to you, Auto Paychecks clients, for all of the regulatory things that we have to track, the leave accruals. If you haven't already set these up, call us, we'll get you set up, but we need to know how you're going to apply it to set it up, because as we talk, different companies are going to apply it differently. But hurry up and get to us, and it's just email that request to info@autopaychecks. And then in January, we expect sometime during January, early February, we expect to have a recap. Maybe some of the dust will settle, where Michael will join us again and help us to understand these complex issues. So thank you to everybody who's joined. We appreciate your time. If you have questions around payroll administrating this, please give us a call. And certainly if you have labor-related issues, give Michael and his team a call there. So we're going to miss you, Alicia.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Bye-bye.
Happy
Thank you,
holidays.
Michael.
Everybody stay healthy. Have a happy and healthy holidays.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.